right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our session. I'm really excited to be here, and it's so great to see all of you. Before we get started, let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you work in the energy industry? Okay, our group is over here. And how many of you are doing migrations? Okay, over here. What about Gen AI, the hottest topic? How many of you are experimenting with Gen AI or deploying them? Okay, great. You're in the right session, because we're going to be talking about all of them today. My name is Lee. I'm a senior manager of solutions architecture with AWS. I'm part of the AWS for Energy and Utilities business group. Today, I'm excited to present with my customer, Mike Brogan, who is chief architect of BPX Energy. We'll talk to you about BPX going all in on AWS, simplifying their multi-cloud posture, and including the migration of SAP and Esri ArcGIS. We have a great agenda for you today. We're going to be talking about the opportunity and challenge with migration and Gen AI. And then Mike will take you through their journey, a real-life customer example of how they migrated onto AWS from Azure. And then I will come back later and talk to you about the Gen AI vision and data strategy, and then deep dive into a Gen AI solution architecture. So this is a 300-level session for both business folks and technical folks in the room. We have multiple real-life examples and solutions architecture. So now let's get started. First, what is the opportunity and what are the business drivers for cloud migration and modernization? Customers have a lot of reasons for migrating to AWS. We're going to start on the bottom left and work our way clockwise. Customers may have data center exit and consolidation events. Your business could be going global. You could have mergers and acquisition events, which is very common in our energy industry. Customers want to increase agility and staff productivity. They want to transform their enterprises into data-driven organizations, have faster insights into their own customers. Going to top right, cost reduction. Customers are achieving 25 to 50% cost savings on AWS versus on-premises. 25 to 50%. But customers have come to expect a lot more than just cost savings on AWS. They want to improve their security and operational resilience. They want to deliver digital transformation and enterprise modernization. And they want to be responsible corporate citizens on sustainability. The most recent trend that we see, obviously, is Gen AI, where we see customers are reinvesting those cost savings back into their business. But there are challenges. AWS has worked with thousands of customers on migrations, and we see a common set of challenges. First is cloud operations and security. You need to define a cloud operating model and do it securely. Second, program management and planning. No one is going to stop the business for a year just so we can do migrations. So we need to manage those dependencies while executing on business goals. Third, resource availability. You will need people who understand your technology state and cloud. And it's not just people availability, it's also available money and time resources. There could be technical blockers. There are many different varieties. One of my favorites is always a networking problem. But to be fair to all of our networking colleagues, it could be version incompatibility. What about system integrations? Always fun. And if you have a commercial off-the-shelf application, you may want to call your vendor and for application-level support because you're thinking about migrating to AWS and you're using Amazon RDS for database. The question really is, what do we do about these? So first, let's just recognize that migration and modernization is a journey. We've seen thousands of customers take this structured approach. First, assess. You're assessing your readiness of your teams, your stakeholders, your business. You're creating a case for change. Second, mobilize. You're mobilizing through experiences. So this is about those early wins. You're generating momentum. You're generating excitement. You're iterating so you can go even faster. One of the things you may be doing during this phase is you're building that operating model in the cloud. An example is obviously Cloud Center of Excellence. Third, migrate and modernize. Once you have your landing zone ready, now you're really accelerating and migrating at scale. The majority of customers that we see take the opportunity to do at least some modernization. I mean, who wants to deal with those security and service life vulnerabilities, right? That first security challenge that we talked about. At this stage, you're doing continuous optimizations for performance, for cost, for operational excellence. As it turned out, all the pillars of the AWS well-architected framework that you're familiar with. So we see this structured approach from all customers that we work with. Now, a quick show of hands. Which of you have seen similar opportunities, challenge, and maybe even a similar approach from your past experiences, at least at a high level? OK, great. Thank you. Well, today, we have an exciting story to share with you. See a real-life example from BPX Energy. It's been an incredible journey to see what the BPX teams have been able to do. And I'm pleased to introduce Mike Brogan, Chief Architect of BPX, to share more with you.
Thanks, Lee, and welcome, everyone. As Lee said, I'm Mike Brogan. I'm the Chief Architect for BPX Energy. I've been with BPX now for a little over 6 years. Our cloud journey started a little before I got there, but I've been there for the fun parts of it. What I'm going to talk about today is our one cloud migration effort. Talk to you about why we did it, a little bit about how we did it, the benefits we're thinking we're getting from that effort, and things we learned along the way. So maybe y'all can get some things out of that. As we go along, we also have a number of the members of the project team in the room. So afterwards, if folks have detailed questions, you could potentially discuss with them as well. But first, just a little bit about BPX Energy. We're the U.S. onshore oil and gas division of BP. Thanks to an acquisition in 2018 of assets from BHP, our portfolio is primarily centered in the Permian, Eagle Ford, and Haynesville basins. Over the last few years, we divested of most of the assets we held prior to that so that we could focus, and focus is going to be a common theme in this presentation, on getting the most value out of that set of assets. We are based in Denver. But again, our assets are mostly in Texas. So our journey started in 2017. We started dabbling in the cloud like most folks do, with SaaS-based services, with storage, with VMs. We also started playing with IoT with AWS at that period of time. But in 2019 is when things really got serious for us in the cloud. Remember, I said we acquired those assets from BHP in 2018. In 2019, we took over operations of those. So in the spring of 2019, we put our upstream SCADA systems into AWS. In the fall of 2019, we put our SAP instance into another cloud. And that's where we started our dual cloud strategy. We did that largely for, I'll call it severe security separation. We put our control, our OT operations technology environment into AWS. We put our corporate or IT information technology environment into another cloud. We need to do that to get the security folks on board who hadn't seen a SCADA in a public cloud before. Over the next couple of years, we continued to migrate assets into the clouds, and we started working on consolidating our data, started moving towards a single data lake in the cloud. Also started getting deeper into analytics and machine learning. And we looked at different solutions for that, and we landed on Amazon SageMaker. This was actually a major influence on what would come next because it was the first corporate or IT asset that we put into our AWS cloud. If any of y'all were here 2 years ago when Jordy Harrell, our CTO, talked about our cloud journey, which I forgot to talk about a couple slides ago, the only thing showing in that corporate environment was SageMaker. And that got us thinking, Why are we in two clouds? We know that we can secure everything. We can still segregate everything if it's all in a single cloud. We know that there's a lot of extra work that we have to do to be in two clouds. So in 23, we made the decision to migrate to a single cloud and kick off the One Cloud initiative. It's been an 18-month journey. I'm happy to say, like most things, we're 99% of the way there. That last mile is always the longest. There's a couple stragglers coming along, but we're now to the point where we can start realizing the benefits of being in a single cloud. And then moving on and taking advantage of that to do AI and Gen AI solutions. And what comes next? Everybody says more AI. But for us, we're looking towards 2030, and this is where we really see the benefits of this. As a corporate objective, we're doubling our production by 2030 with the objective to do it without increasing cash costs and without increasing headcount. We can't do that without taking advantage of technology, and we're doing that in the cloud. So our vision for doing one cloud, what do we hope to gain? Now, everybody would expect to see cost here. That was not our target. We do expect over time to see cost efficiencies, but all the analysis we did, it was soft dollars that we would see. Matter of fact, we almost talked ourselves out of it at one point because the numbers looked too good to be believable. But our real focus here is, from a technology perspective, simplification. This is part of a bigger simplification journey. I mentioned we have one upstream SCADA. We have one time series database. We've moved to a single data lake. We've moved to a single SAP instance. We've even streamlined our services partners. Simplification is a big part of what we do. That simplification then lets us convince our leaders that we're going to get efficiencies out of not doing things two different ways, of not having to have two sets of skills for everything. Again, being able to focus on what we're trying to do by not being spread too thin. Having that simplification, having those efficiencies, then lets us increase the pace of innovation and value delivery for our business. At the end of the day, in technology, we're here to give value to our business. And this is what happens when you try to reuse an executive summary slide in a presentation like this. We'll start with the timeline area. I mentioned it was an 18-month project. We would have loved to have done it in 12 months. We knew that was unrealistic. We set an original plan of 15 months to try to push the edge, knowing that we would go a bit over. We did have some bumps in the road, got to 18 months. We started by migrating SAP. Who migrates SAP first? That sounds kind of crazy, right? To take one of your biggest and most complex applications and move it, but that's what we did. While we were doing that, we worked on the architecture and design of the other applications and services and databases that had to move. Then we broke those applications up, kind of traditional migration approach, into multiple waves and migrated the applications over in batches. What applications did we move? Well, we had 91 applications, at least that we counted when we were done. Don't always trust these numbers because they all change every time we count them up, but to a lot of y'all, 91 may not be a lot of applications. To us, that's a third of our estate. We count around 300 applications. Says something to the effect of how many we have in SaaS that we didn't have more to migrate. 280 terabytes of file share data. Reminds me, I moved this year from Denver to Houston. I had a storage unit full of stuff. I kind of know what's in there, and I wanted to get it done, get the move done quickly. So much like our migration, which we wanted to get done quickly, we didn't take the time to sort through all that stuff. So we just moved it all. And it's kind of heavy, big. We wound up having to pay a third party to move our storage unit. We had to bring in a third party solution to move all that data and all the ACLs and get it done in time. And then there's all the little stuff, which was really what made this complex. 1,000-ish serverless components that were existing in the other cloud that needed to move to AWS. And as much as we like to think when we do architecture diagrams and big concepts of technology, we like to think that services in one cloud are equivalent to service in the other cloud. Well, not always so much. And we did do quite a bit of modernization as we went along. Some of it was just getting up to speed with the 21st century, using infrastructure as code, using deployment pipelines, using containers instead of VMs. Some of it was shoring up our deployments by making sure everything met our standards of having 3 separate environments, a non-prod, a pre-prod, and a production. Shoring up our high availability and disaster recovery configurations. So we came out with a much more robust platform and set of applications by the time we were done with this. We also leveraged things we learned when we did that BHP acquisition back in 2019. We followed the same processes of taking each application through an architecture review, through a change control board, through a security risk assessment. So some of the major applications we migrated, Lee already mentioned. I mentioned SAP was first. And we did that in 5 months. And here's a euphemism. We did it to build momentum. I call that a euphemism. Who's familiar with the term burn the ships? Anybody? There's even a song out there called Burn the Ships. Well, the whole concept behind burning the ships is once you've gone somewhere and you've burned your ships, you can't go back. So we wanted to make sure once we got started, nobody would get the bright idea of having us turn it around. So we did SAP first. SAP for us was largely a lift and shift. We'll go into that in a little more detail next. ArcGIS, another major application. This was one that on our previous platform was not performing, was not scalable, had lots of outages. So this one we did a fairly significant re-architecture of the infrastructure between ArcGIS. And then another major one, we call it the Well-Connected Portal. Large, custom-developed platform with multiple applications within it that we really wished we were able to decom instead of migrate. But we had to migrate them because the decom wasn't on track. Now, we did get a little lucky. We had the guy who had developed most of those applications on our migration team as one of our cloud architects, and he's sitting back over here in the corner. So that helped with that one. But on to SAP. This is probably the most simple SAP diagram you'll ever see, and I'm not going to promise you're going to get a lot of information from the diagram itself. This is just a very high-level network diagram. It doesn't show the over 100 interfaces and integrations we've got to our SAP platform. It emphasizes an area that we didn't predict, which was that we would decide to re-engineer how we integrate with the parent company, BP, through the course of this effort, and basically treat them more like an external partner than part of the same company. We did, at SAP's request, take a few moments to think about migrating our SAP instance into SaaS instead of keeping it in our own cloud. We decided there weren't enough benefits for that at this point in time. We'll see in a couple of years if their offering gets better. But I did mention integrations, hundreds of integrations, some of them internal, some of them external, some of them to BP, file transfers, APIs. Anybody here with SAP knows what I'm talking about. It's not unique, but that was where all the complexity was in moving SAP. What we really found was taking this big monolithic application and moving it was actually a lot simpler than moving a lot of smaller ones or even some of the smaller ones. Another risk area we had is for production accounting, we've got customizations on our SAP system, Crawford Plus packs. So we had to spend extra attention making sure that those migrated over to AWS successfully and continued to function. Our business, after we did this migration, they called it a non-event because it went very well. But tell that to the 100 people who were on the line during migration weekend. It was not a non-event to them, but testimony to their hard work. We did do one upgrade, a modernization to SAP as we did this. We moved off the Gluster file system and a VM-based NFS file share that we had in our previous cloud, and we moved to Amazon EFS. Now, I've given lots of words, not all of them very nice, to Amazon or to AWS. about EFS as we've gone through this journey and worked to get things to work on EFS. But, the proof is in the results. In the time since last August when we did this migration, we haven't had a single cluster failure, which previously we were having about once a quarter. Moving on to ArcGIS, we call it one map. This one's a little unique for us. The upper left-hand corner of the diagram focuses on we've got an internet-facing interface on this, a public IP address, which honestly most of our environment doesn't have. So we had to pay particular attention to that. Yes, we've got the Amazon Route 53, we've got virtual Palo Alto firewalls, and we've got an AWS web application firewall in there to enable that. The rest of the architecture there won't look very remarkable to folks. And this, again, might be small compared to some of your ArcGIS implementations. But as I mentioned, we previously shifted ArcGIS into another cloud, and it just didn't work. So this time, we redesigned it correctly. We had quite a bit of a team pulled together. We also had a tight deadline because the platform owner was about to have a baby, so we had to get this done so she could do that without thinking about her platform. And we did it. Now, some modernizations we did here. We moved from Azure File Shares to Amazon FSx. More importantly, we moved the databases from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. We moved from a dedicated SQL server to RDS. Another one of my major conversations with AWS tends to be, can't you get more of the ISVs to certify their products with RDS so we can stop putting SQL Server instances into the cloud? We're working on it. So, advantages of this platform. And yes, this chart has a lot of icons on it. The one I started with had about twice as many icons as this. But I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. Simplification was the original technical goal. That enables security improvements, higher availability, streamlined monitoring, scalability improvements are all easier to achieve when you can be focused on that single platform. Efficiencies, number 2, is how you sell this to the leadership. Focused utilization of skills, alignment around a single platform and objectives. But most importantly, what we hope to get out of this, or are getting out of this, is delivery speed improvement. Again, that word focus on innovation, focus on automation and resiliency of the platform, focus on cost optimization, but most importantly, speeding up the delivery of innovation for our business to meet those 2030 objectives. So some things we learned along the way. Do take advantage of the opportunity to do some modernization while you do this. We talked a couple slides back about the modernization we did at various levels, about making our platforms more stable, more resilient, more performant. We also started to go too far down some roads where we started to make too many changes and it threatened the migration timeline. So you have to balance how fast you're trying to do this against how much modernization you want to do. We had some platforms like the Well-Connected Portal, which had a number of end-of-service life components that we just couldn't take the time to upgrade all of because it would have been effectively a rewrite of the application. So some modernization. You got to find the right balance for your needs. Communicate and coordinate early and often. You can never communicate frequently enough. And you need to use multiple channels. You can do email blasts. You can do meetings and announcements. Use whatever your internal social media type platform is. And sometimes you just have to go meet with people the old-fashioned way. What was really surprising is after all the executive level meetings and mid-management level meetings we had telling folks we were doing this, it was amazing how many times we got called to the carpet by one leader or another. What's this OneCloud thing? And why are you holding up this thing or that thing or another thing that I'm trying to do? This isn't the focus of everybody, so you got to keep waking them up. Documentation is a wonderful thing. We wish we had it when we started this effort. Would have made things a lot smoother, would have caused my implementation partners to complain a little less. We have it now. Hopefully we'll keep it up to date. Enough said. Beware of the unknown, especially things that the business has done. So some of our biggest risks, some of the things that caused us to delay some of our rollouts or changes the longest, we're trying to make sure that's, again, back to the communication, we've caught up with everybody who'd built their own little tools, their own little integrations out there that we in technology don't know about. We'd love to get everything that everybody built into our CMDB, but is that ever really going to happen? Probably not. So beware what's out there that you don't know about and what it might be dependent on or integrate to. Of course, we had that one case where we decommed something. We went through all the processes. We told everybody we thought we needed to tell. We turned it off, and a couple days later, somebody was screaming bloody murder. Another big lesson learned, maybe it might not be the best idea to change out your service partners in the middle of a major migration like this. We changed out about 75% of our support and development teams in the middle of this project. So the teams that needed to tell us about the applications that we're going to migrate, the teams that we were going to transition those applications back to after we migrated them. This really had the biggest impact to the schedule that took us from that 15-month timeline to an 18-month timeline. But we got through it. So what's next? I think everybody could guess the answer to what's next. If not, you haven't been paying attention at reInvent. My next hint will be the AI-generated image on the screen. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let me stand up here today and talk specifically about some of the cool Gen AI things we're doing now that we're focused on a single platform. But Lee's going to come back up, and he's going to talk to you about the process that we've been going through to do it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mike. That was awesome. They is not me, by the way. So let's talk about Gen AI. So innovation can transform industries, and today we're talking about transforming production operations. And we see generative AI in the center can be the catalyst for the transformational change. According to a McKinsey study, generative AI will add between $2.6 to $4.4 trillion of value to the global economy annually with a T. Think about that, right? The scale. For comparison, the UK economy at the time of the study was about $3.1 trillion. So a change of this magnitude will have a transformational change on a global scale. But customers have questions as they start building Gen AI. Maybe some of you have similar questions. First, how can I keep my data secure and private? Security is job zero at AWS, as you know, and it's also top of mind for customers. Second, how do I move quickly, especially at scale? How do I get started? I want to innovate fast, but I wonder what are the different ways for me to get started and my teams and my company? Third, model selection. There are so many. What's best for me, for my use case, and for my requirements? So we'll talk about these today, but we'll start with the big picture. The Gen AI vision and roadmap. The vision simply is to get to the business value on the top right. Think about the McKinsey study. It's saying Gen AI will add trillions of dollars of value to the global economy. The question is, how do we get there? Is there a roadmap? So if we want to get to the business value on the top, then we got to start working ourselves backwards from the bottom left, right? Identify key business goals and values. So today we're talking about transforming production operations. That means increase production, safety always, decrease non-productive time, decrease cost, and managing risks. For your company, it could be different. It could be growth, profitability. It could be inventing and building new products and services. And then you'll find yourself on this roadmap. You're going to assess your current technology and data platforms, simplify, as Mike said, where you see complexity, and build capability where you see a gap. And then you're going to develop AI and data strategy, train and upskill your employees. Remember that skills gap that we talked about during migrations? It still applies here in Gen AI, perhaps even more so because this space is evolving and changing so fast. And then you're going to establish a governance, security, and risk management framework. Eventually, you'll get to this inflection point, which is where you will build and or acquire AI and Gen AI solutions. The reason you'll eventually get there is because you're not going to sit on the sidelines forever while everybody else around the world is just going to move past by you. Once you get there, then it's just a matter of piloting and testing solutions, deploying and monitoring in production, and then you're going to evaluate in this continuous improvement and scaling to get to the business value. That's the big picture. So let's get back to answer those 3 specific questions about data, about how customers can start it quickly, and also model selection. First one is about data. Everyone talks about Gen AI models and applications. In our experience working with customers, as they should. It's very exciting, it's fast-moving, fast-evolving, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the surface, there's a lot more. You will still need to store all of your structured and unstructured data. You will still have all of your operational databases of all varieties because you're supporting applications and customer experiences today. Data lakes and analytics are key because that's where you accumulate your company and business specific data. And then data integration. You're going to set up data pipelines. You're going to transform your data so that it's ready for AI and Gen AI solutions. Last but not least, data governance. Ensure data quality, privacy and compliance, security and access controls. Data is your differentiator. Starting on the left with the modern data strategy with a scalable data lake and purpose-built data services, that'll get you to a better Gen AI model at the top where it's a lot more contextually relevant to your company and your business. Better Gen AI model and experiences will lead to better products and services that'll attract more users, increase user adoption, engagement, that will generate more data, which will then lend back in your scalable data lake. So now we talked about data. The next piece is customers are asking, I want to get started quickly because everyone is moving around me in my industry. My partners, my competitors, they're all jumping on this Gen AI trend. So customers are asking, how do I move quickly? What are some of the ways? Some of you choose to work with our mutual partners. That's one way. Some of you try to DIY, do it yourself within your own company. But here are some examples and ways of innovating with AWS directly. So these are the examples where BPX and AWS lean into our partnership together. So on the far left, we have engaging with AWS solutions architects. So we call them SAs to think big, innovate, ideate. Now, what's interesting about this one, I'll just spend 30 seconds on it, is that you may all have heard Gartner Magic Quadrant, where they named AWS as strategic cloud platform services leader for 14 years in a row. So what's new this year is that Gartner actually specifically called out AWS solution support as a key differentiating strength on AWS. So what that means is working with AWS SAs, solutions architects, who are specialized in industry verticals, specific technology stacks, or enterprise workloads. They'll work with you to do co-design sessions and deliver solutions specific to your use cases and requirements. So in the middle is Generative AI Innovation Center. This is a way for some of our teams to work with you as customers to accelerate the MVP scoping, do rapid POC prototyping, and design a path to production. In our engagement, we also worked with AWS professional services as a part of our delivery. Finally, on the far right is Amazon methodology of innovation. So we worked with digital innovations teams, leveraging Amazon working backwards mechanism. We wrote PR FAQ and developed user stories and visuals for our product. So what did we do together? Here's our Gen AI solution overview. We're going to start on the left with the users. These users could be office employees and/or field operations teams. They can have a conversation experience with their data. So they're going to interact with the application starting with a question to the application. The first solution component is called question rewriter. That solution component is going to take the user requests and questions along with conversation context and perhaps past conversation history and rewrite the question with additional context. It's going to send the rewritten question to the second solution component called the router. The router decides if it's a Python use case or SQL generation use case. Then if it's a Python generation use case, it's going to send it to the Python generator on the top right. An example here is to execute the Python code and generate a graph. Then if it's a SQL generation use case, it's going to send it to the fourth solution component called the SQL generator. That's going to generate the SQL query, execute the query, and return tabular data. Finally, the retrieved data and the natural language context are synthesized by the solution component on center bottom called data to text. That's going to synthesize both the tabular data and the natural language query into a text response back to the user on the far left. Let's also walk through the application architecture together. This is a 300-level session, so you knew this was coming. But we'll walk through it together. So first, we're actually going to start on the top right part of the application architecture. So we start over here by storing documents in Amazon S3 on the far right. So these could be PDF documents, could be production operations, manuals, and procedures, which are very common in our industry. Then we're going to use Amazon TextTract on top to extract information out of the documents, forms, tables, images. And we're going to convert the documents into vectors and store the vectors into Amazon OpenSearch service. Obviously, we use Amazon Bedrock in our engagement, and we use the embeddings model to do the conversion into vectors. So we're starting here at this part of the application because we are preparing your application with your data. Remember, we just talked about data is your differentiator. So before your users ever come in to interact with your application, we're doing some work over here. And then the rest of the application follows a serverless application architecture design. So we get back to the far left, where the end users interact with the front-end application. The application sends a request to Amazon API Gateway. API Gateway is backed by AWS Lambda. And then to handle concurrent users, where we have multiple users interacting with the applications, we use Amazon SQS Simple Queue Service and Amazon DynamoDB to queue and store multiple user requests and concurrency on bottom left. And then once it's a SQL generation use case, the Lambda function calls Bedrock to generate the SQL query. SQL query runs against databases on AWS. Now I'm saying databases because it could be more than just relational database, RDS, right? It could be all varieties of your operational databases that you may have running on AWS. Relational data is retrieved, and for a RAG pattern, retrieval augmented generation pattern, then Lambda function will retrieve and return the data. Then Lambda function will call Bedrock again to synthesize the tabular data and the natural language context as a text response back to the users on the front end. OK, I'll pause for a second so you can take a picture. OK, great. OK, so now we talked about data. We talked about how to get started together between AWS and customers and what we can do together. The third question is, customers want to know how to select models, right? There's so many models. How do I select what's best for me? So what we see is model selection is a balance between accuracy, latency, and cost. So throughout 2024, we continue to see a very fast pace of innovation in foundation models and large language models. You all have heard some new ones that came out just a few days ago. So there is no one model to rule them all, and customers benefit from model choices and selections. So finally, this is a summary of our model selection in our engagement. We built multiple Gen AI solution components you saw earlier using models. We tried different combinations of prompt engineering techniques and different models to improve our performance. We use that balance between accuracy, latency, and cost as our selection criteria. And the solution components, prompt engineering techniques, and models are summarized in the table below that you can see. OK, with that, today we talked about migration and modernization is a journey. And Mike took you through the BPX Energy example of one cloud, where they simplified their cloud infrastructure and posture. We talked about Gen AI vision and data strategy, where data is a differentiator. We talked about ways and examples of innovating with AWS. And finally, model selection is a balance. If you want to learn more about details and context of today's presentation, here are some QR codes for you to take away. Just while you're doing that, I'll spend a brief moment explaining what they are. The first one is a joint blog between AWS and BPX Energy. It has a lot more details on our use case and implementation details. The one in the middle is a presentation from CERAWeek with Matt McElhaney, head of data science and AI at BPX Energy. Very grateful to have Matt doing that presentation. And then the one on the far right is what Mike alluded to earlier, where Jordy Harrell, who is the CTO of BPX Energy, did a presentation 2 years ago on their journey at that point in time. I'm also thankful for the BPX teams here in the room today. With that, thank you for your time and for coming, listening to our journey and story. One favor we'll ask is to please fill out the survey, as all the other sessions. Those 5 stars will really help us. And then we're happy to take any questions you may have here on the side. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your Raven.